will help us shape the conversation to make it as effective and tailored for you. I'll leave that up for a while. And just for anyone who may have joined late, welcome and thank you for joining us. You can pose questions and chat in the chat box. To chat, just type away and then post your comment. To ask a question, just click on the Ask a Question tab in the same field, in the same box. Pose your question, ideally direct it to one of the panelists, and I will then pose it to them and share it with them, and they can answer your questions there. So thank you very much for that. Great to see the polls coming in there so we can see where you're from. Thank you very much. Let's see, let's keep that going there. Okay, great. Let's just see. Oh, great. Strong nonprofit organization representation there. Great to see small and medium businesses as well, such an important role to play as well. Big business, consultants, great, and academics. Thank you very much. Keep those votes coming in as you join online. And then we'll now switch to a brief introduction. I'm pleased to see some familiar faces, but there really are a lot of new names on. It's a new year, and thank you again for joining us. Welcome to our CSI Nonprofit Network. A special welcome if you're a first timer. I'd like to take a moment just to tell you a bit about Trialogue and our services. We're one of a few consultancies that focuses exclusively on responsible business. We do this through our consulting services as well as through our knowledge sharing platforms, all of which aim to make CSI in South Africa and ESG and sustainability more effective. So the two main types of consulting that we do are CSI strategy, development, and monitoring and evaluation. You may know our flagship platforms quite well. Our Business and Society Handbook, which was launched in December, so it's still very new. I will share a link to it if you haven't got it as yet. Buy a copy, download the full online version if you'd like. And then our Business and Society Conference, which is actually just around the corner in May, and registration is opening today as well. So I'll pop that into the chat box at some stage, so you'll have those two there. Please do engage with those, see what we've got lined up for this year. And in case of the handbook, some of the rich content that we've got in that handbook this year. I'd also like to take you through the Knowledge Hub, the Trialogue Knowledge Hub, where it's a free repository where we post information, data, content from our handbook, content from our conferences and other thought leadership platforms as well. And really is a rich platform for you to take with you throughout the year. So thank you for that. Yeah, the Trialogue Knowledge Hub really is a really good repository of information, both for business and for nonprofits as well. All of our content from the handbook is loaded there, as well as all of our other thought leadership as well. So I'll pop that into the chat function. If you haven't visited it as yet, please do. I understand some of you didn't hear. There was no sound coming through. Apologies for that. We'll share that with you after this as well, for you to get a better sense of what the Knowledge Hub is. So thank you very much for that. So let's start unpacking the topic for today. So some of the trends we will be unpacking with the panel today, the changing regulatory environment driving corporate giving in new ways of giving. The UK is establishing the Office for Impact Economy, Japan regulations regarding impact investing, India's evolving regulation of CSR, which they've had for quite some time, Brazil's disclosure requirements. We've also got South Africa's triple BEE codes, the JC Sustainability Disclosure Guidelines as well. And as we look at, one of the things that we talk about quite often here at Trialogue are the various stages of CSI, from CSI 101, CSI 201, I mean 202, not 201, CSI 2.0, and then you've obviously got CSI 3.0 as well. And we've actually got a strategic CSI award where we award and recognize businesses who've got strong strategic CSI programs aligned with the objectives of the business on that front. I'm going to put up the second poll now so that we can see, you can give me your thoughts on what the three most important factors are that will drive CSI in 2026. You can select up to 3 options there, and I'll leave that up for a while as you give us your votes. Okay, thank you for those votes coming in. That's great. More votes coming in on our earlier poll. If you've joined us late, thank you very much. That is still up, and you can take that, letting us know which organization you're from there. Some good representation across the board, across nonprofit organizations, big business, small business, government, consultants, academics, and others as well. And if you did click other, won't you pop it into the box? It'll be great for us to understand and not leave any sectors out next time. So that would be great. On the current votes coming through, so what are some of your thoughts on what do you believe are the 3 most important factors that will drive CSI in 2026? So we've got quite a few votes coming through for better collaboration between companies to drive scale. I think that's a very important topic. And if we are going to drive scale, collaboration is going to be key to that. In 2024, our theme across the year at Trialogue was collaboration. Then we've got stronger economic performance, boosting companies' capacity to give. That's a very interesting one. The better the economy does, the better companies do. And I think we've seen it from research out of Brazil last year, which Patricia will tell us about. But also, we've seen resilience from companies continuing to give even under tough economic circumstances. We've also got improved alignment between giving practices and business and business strategy. I think that's really great now when you start talking about strategic CSI. Companies shifting to funding nonprofits and not only projects. Such a key topic, and I think we'll touch on that as well today. So thank you very much for that. Keep those votes coming in. Really interesting to see what your thoughts are on that as well. So now, if we look at just what are some of the global CSI trends, right? In the 2025 handbook, we've actually got an article that looks at global CSI trends across Brazil, South Africa, and America, where research came out of as well. And Patricia will be able to touch on the Brazil research, which they conducted last year. So it was very interesting to see. And here you just have a look at some of the sectors where CSI spending was allocated. Education obviously coming out quite as top and clear, and top in South Africa and Brazil, also included in the US, just not at the top as well. And if we look at India and some of the research Sattva Consulting did last year, you'll see that over 51% of CSR spend in 23 sectors across the top 19 industries rather were aligned with the needs of that sector. So again, speaking to the strategic alignment of CSI there, and then nearly a third of all companies allocated around 75% of their CSR budgets to sectors linked to business critical issues there. And very encouragingly, India's got a legally mandated giving percentage, 765 companies there being found spending more than 2 times their mandated CSR budgets there. So that's really good and gives us a good indication of how, what the trends are in each of these countries that we'll be speaking about today. You can also read through the detailed analysis of our CSI support and spend in South Africa in the 28th edition of the Trialogue Business and Society Handbook. Again, I'll post all of those links once the conversation is underway. I'd now like to introduce our panelists for today. Nick Rocky, Trialogue Managing Director; Arti Mohan, she's the co-founder and partner at Sattva Consulting, who I mentioned in India; and Patricia Loyola, Director of Management and Social Investment at Comunitas, our partners in Brazil, joining us again this year. So thank you very much to them. Just before I cross over to them for their opening statements, I'm going to put up the third poll. Which sector do you expect to receive the most increased social CSI focus in 2026 compared to previous years? So where are we going to see increased focus, attention? Education is always a top one in a country like South Africa, but over the years we've seen changes in trends of those sectors. I think last year health saw a really strong increase in terms of support for that sector relative to others, and relative to support for it in previous years as well. So which one do you think we're going to see? Where are companies likely to shift their focus to increasingly in 2026? So let me leave that up for a while. Thank you. I see those votes coming in there, so thank you very much. And while you're voting, or if you voted already, just a couple of resources for you. That's Trialogue Knowledge Hub, which I had mentioned there. It's got a really good NPO directory, which features on that Knowledge Hub as well, where you can find NPOs in various different sectors as well, and they feature that. So if you're an NPO, please do reach out for us to find out about listing details and costs, and then booking for the Trialogue Business and Society Conference taking place on the 5th and 6th of May at the Wanderers Club in Ilovo. That registration is opening today, and you can also participate if you're a sponsor and NPOs in our Trialogue Business and Society Handbook, which will be coming out again in December. Really is resource rich, research rich as well, in terms of what is the current state of CSI in our country as well. So let's see how some of those votes are coming through. There we go. What are your thoughts? Okay, skills development. So a lot more focus on skills development, particularly digital skills and youth employment. Okay, so you think there'll be a lot of focus on that. A lot of focus on the climate adaptation and environmental sustainability. Key one, that coming in at 26%. So a lot of you thinking that that's where there'll be a lot more focus. Also disaster relief and preparedness. What we see from our research, that declined a bit last year, obviously from the highs of COVID and the years after that. But as we see, disasters continue to happen, especially with climate change becoming coming into sharp focus as well. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to ask my panelists to get ready now and turn the focus to them. I'd now like to invite Nick Rocky, the Managing Director at Trialogue, for his opening statement. Nick, if you can switch on your camera and your mic, and then we'll be good to go. So, Nick, how would you characterize 2025 for CSI in South Africa? And where did companies invest, and what were some of the shifts made in practice?
Yeah, no, thanks, Sheldon. So I think you just highlighted the fact that in terms of where the money went sectorally, it went into education at sort of 44%, and then the other sectors, social community development, food and agriculture, healthcare, etc. And yeah, there are shifts there, but the shifts are slow, and you get minor shifts from year to year from a sectoral point of view. I think where we put a lot of thought and energy is into outside of the direct sort of flow into which sectors is how the money is being spent, and the sort of patterns around shifts towards more strategic spending. And again, I mean, CSI is an evolving space. So you ask whether how things changed in one year. The truth is that moves slowly. It moves slowly. It has moved slowly in the past, and it's likely to continue. So we look sort of more broadly over longer term in terms of where we're seeing the shifts. The movements are gradual. We don't see massive year-on-year shifts, but we start seeing signs of interest in new patterns, new spending ways, etc. And that's always an early indication of where things are trending towards. So I think over the years, and certainly reinforced last year, a sort of a shift towards greater professionalism, efforts for companies to become more impactful, interested in testing new approaches, more innovation. And as much as that interest exists and people are sort of testing their programs to see what can change, traditional lending patterns still prevail in many instances and holds back the sort of fundamental shift. So you're unlikely to see a company go from one approach completely to another approach over a year. It's more like they will stay with legacy programs and start testing new ideas. So we're absolutely seeing a shift towards more strategic CSI. Trialogue's got a 4x4 matrix where we track strategic CSI versus what we call developmental commercial CSI or grant making. And we're seeing an uptick of companies claiming to be in the more strategic space. More than half the spend now is said to be in strategic space or perceived to be in strategic space. So we often, when you go in and actually really start interrogating how that spend looks, we might not see it as profoundly placed as that in the strategic space, but it's definitely an interest of companies to be there, and they're doing they're making changes to the program in order to show themselves in a more strategic space. And by strategic, we're saying aligned to company interests and achieving some sort of developmental outcome and impact. And that shared value positioning, which is seen to be strategic and classified as that, as far as our metrics is concerned. You put up that chart around the evolution, and we again constantly seeing this shift from the sort of CSI 2.0 to 3.0, but a lot of the programs are really still focused in that sort of flagship project space. Not as many in the sort of grant making early year type investment approach, and dabbling at the sort of more systemic impact, stronger integration, 3.0 type programs. I think again, the interest and the early signs are there. The reality, probably the movements into that space are coming from outside the corporate space. Some of the foundations and some sort of collective initiatives coming out of some of the NPOs in terms of the work that they do. And then I think sort of thirdly, interesting to see that poll that M&E came up as one of the areas. And if you ask most companies, do you do M&E? Do you measure outcomes? Most will say yes, they do, and in fact, there's resources and effort put into that. But I think where the shifts in that is going to be is to more advanced use and application of M&E. So really understanding, where M&E is, what the results are looking like, how you dashboard that, how do you respond to that, and then how do you apply lessons, how do you extract insights from the work you're doing, and sort of apply those to sort of knowledge sharing and influencing the space that organizations are operating within. So again, perceptions of better M&E, in practice, still a little bit of slowness there, not enough budgets being made available, although even though there are formal policies in place to run M&E, often this is done sort of makeshift budgets and not as formalized or as thorough as it could be. And I think that is a change that we certainly started to see with our clients, where there's a much greater interest in making that work better for the organization, becoming more real and more bedded into the work that the organizations are doing. So I think I've touched on a number of concepts. These will come up again through the webinar. We'll go back to those in more detail as we go, but that's kind of how I see the space at the moment.
Thanks very much, Nick. And I think, you make a good point. As much as things, it may feel like there's a lot going on and a lot happening, but the actual rate of change and on some of the bigger picture elements and factors, takes a lot longer than we actually expect. Ati, I want to turn to you now and the picture in India. How can CSR in India in 2025 be described? Where did corporate giving flow, and what were some of the dominant trends?
Thanks, Sheldon, and thanks for this lovely opportunity. So good to be doing this. It's been 10 years since the CSR Act started, right? And just to recount, companies that have are profitable and have profits of over 500 crores, net worth of over 500 crores or profit of over 50 crores have to spend at least 2% of their net profits on CSR. And CSI has to be separate from the business. You cannot invest in something that's related to your business. And 3, it has to be with implementation partners. And there are a set of areas that the law recommends. So we're 10 years into this whole piece. And I would say that in 10 years, it has achieved scale and seriousness, but it's now being reshaped by what the companies are and where they operate and how strategically they're choosing to engage, right? And what I mean by this is, every year it's growing at an 8 to 10% CAGR growth, right? And about 30,000 INR crores, which is about $3.5 billion US has been invested in CSR over the last 10 years, right? But what is changing now, it's not the size of the capital because that's a steady 10%, but actually the behavior of the companies that are deploying this capital. Promoter-led companies, for example, are deploying their capital more in legacy areas, in CSR in education and health, national identity, whereas more professionally led companies and multinational corporations are far more likely to align their CSR with their business areas and their stakeholders. That could be either around the factories and so on, or also in all of their areas for retail and FMCG, for example, in a lot of the areas because they have a widespread sort of presence, right? CSR is therefore being shaped a lot more by leadership and ownership structures. Second is, in the beginning, we saw CSR trying to be more compliant, right? Taking lesser risks and investing a lot more where they can measure what's happening, they can see for themselves what's happening. So a lot more on the headquarters. But we are happy to note that 10 years on, they have moved towards more strategic CSR. Today, we see a lot more companies that are investing much further from their places of operation. Companies that are investing in very risky, very innovation capital kind of areas, like, climate innovation or looking at sustainability and early demonstration where philanthropy can help, looking at innovative financing and blended capital, which I can talk about later, even allying with the government and being able to complement the government spending with their approaches, and so on. So we can see that corporates are going much further to, and we have these aspirational districts in India, the districts that are really aggressively pursuing development, and we can see a lot more CSR focused in these districts. A third thing that is happening is who is receiving this funding. In the early years, it was a lot of implementation nonprofits and INGOs that were receiving this capital. But today, what's happening slowly in the last few years, a shift has happened where academic institutions that are looking at grassroots innovation, more of the scientific institutions, as much as the nonprofits are receiving this capital. So there is a difference in also who the CSR is partnering with, and going into a problem-solving mindset. So if I have to solve the problem of safe drinking water, how do I, at one hand, work with the grassroots, and at the other hand, also look at demonstrating more affordable innovation, for which I partner with the scientific institutions. Both of these are coming to the fore, right? The one last interesting thing I'll say is that we see innovation across a range of budgets because it is proportional to their size and profits. But we see overspending more happening in the bottom and the middle, and underspending happening at the top. The people that have the most budgets are not able to spend in the prescribed 2% in a year, and that shows us that there is more capacity building to be done, and more absorptive capacity to come in. So if there were somebody were to give a check for $10 million, there are not that many NGOs that can pick it up and be able to demonstrate impact in a year, because that 1 year is the kind of period for CSR. So these are some interesting trends based on which we are likely to see many more changes, right? And I think three things that have worked very well, right? In the beginning, it was more compliance. And then people strengthened the governance system, and a lot more professionalization of the teams in CSR came into the companies. So there we saw a lot more happening. And the last is when measurement became a mandate by the law, independent measurement started to come in, and then shone a light on many things in development that could further be strengthened and improved collaboratively. So interesting times for CSR in India. I'll pass over with that back to you, Sheldon.
Thank you so much, Aarti. I mean, that really sounds like such a good platform to allow us to discuss what's happening in India, what's happened over this past year, and what we can look forward to in 2026. I'd now like to turn to Patricia. Patricia, from a Brazilian perspective, Brazil saw a sharp increase in corporate giving, at least from a financial perspective, that overall giving number in 2025. What were some of the factors that drove that increase, and what other noticeable trends were there in 2025?
Sheldon, I'm happy to collaborate again in this thought leadership with you and a continuous exchange experience and peer learning. So it's a pleasure. Regarding Brazil, yeah, indeed we saw a sharp high enhance of our investment. The corporate giving here achieved its highest historical value, so almost 6 billion reais. That's around $1.2 billion dollars. If we look to our historical series, it was the highest one, excluding the exceptional year of 2020. So we had a robust increase comparing with the former year, almost 20% of increase. We can show a consolidation of the investment at levels above the pre-pandemic benchmark. We understood that a portion of this expansion is attributed to the emergency response in Rio Grande do Sul state, that we have unprecedented floods in 2024. But the growth scenario is not only because of this, because if isolate this expansion, we still have a 15% of expansion comparing both years. So for us, data suggests that this performance is linked with the availability of resources. The indicators of social investment as a proportion of companies' financial performance have maintained the trend of stability in recent years. Here in Brazil, the companies apply most of their investments through direct cash, around 60, almost 70%, or their foundation that they create to be their social deliver partner, let's say. So the foundation cash it's around 30%, and this influence much more for the biggest companies. The non-cash investments are least relevant for us, but it's really important for services sector and also the small and medium companies. If you look to the our trend, so it's worth to say that in Brazil we have tax incentives, and this amount consolidate this part, the share of the investment that is around 25% of the whole investment. But last year, the direct cash was even higher because the tax incentive systems was responsible for 23% of this volume. So we do have an increase of 6% of direct investments, what suggests that companies are adopting a more hands-on, let's say, approach to their corporate giving. We have some important trends. One of them is that, as you say, we can see the corporate giving more and more aligned to the business. So what we understand that the corporate giving has some sense responding to business pains, how can I say, business problems and challenges. Of course, they are simultaneously responding to a community challenge. But we have here the young people as the most target of the investments. And this is why it's also responding the corporate giving to the lack of talents, for instance. So the companies are investing in job training, economic inclusion as a response to that. Regarding the program areas, the general trend show us that we have a greater diversification. You have shown in the beginning the thematics that are more that are receiving more investment, but here in Brazil we have much more concentration in education and culture that we have in the former years that we have now. We have a more diversification as a direct response to this elevate protagonism of industrial companies. So they are in the territorial. So the territory will demand different kind of investments in health, social systems, and so on. Besides that, the territorial driven initiatives are gaining traction in CSR planning. This is also a reason. And we saw a boost of co-investment and coalitions arrangements among companies. I believe that they understand that the problems are so complex that they have to collaborate. So nearly 80% of our network has executing collaboration, has some kind of collaboration, and this could happen with their chain of providers, so their value chain, and collaborating as most in the most of the cases in common causes, more than in territories. It's most difficult to find local partners to collaborate around a territory, but causes it's really common to us. So sometimes competitors in the market are collaborating to a sector and a challenge that they have in common. These are some of the trends that we have here, and I'm happy to keep on our conversation.
Thank you so much, Patricia. If I could just ask Artie and Nick to switch their cameras on, and we'll move to the discussion part of the conversation to our Audience, thank you very much for joining us. If you have joined us late, just a reminder, you can just type your comment into the chat box, and you can comment on the discussions, connect with your fellow delegates. If you want to ask a question, just click on the green Ask a Question tab button on the top right-hand corner of the chat box, and then it'll come through to me as a question. So thank you very much, Narosha. I've seen your question. Charmaine, thank you very much for your question as well. Nicola, I think you've also asked a question as well. I know it was answered, but it's a really good one. I think you talk about the L there, which Nick alluded to as he was talking about, the importance of monitoring and evaluation, and the L obviously being learning there. But before we go into some of the conceptual or some of the macro pictures, let's start with Narosha's question, Nick, because I think that's what keeps a lot of NPOs awake at night in terms of their fundraising. So Narosha's asking, Nick, and I'll come to our other panelists as well to see what the situation is in their territories. What methods are most effective for accessing and developing relationships with CSI funders?
Yeah, thanks. There's always no silver bullet to securing funding, and it's something that I think does keep a lot of NPOs awake at night. We've seen that shift away from companies funding. It still exists, but companies less often now fund a lot of organizations with smaller grants. So it really is about funding fewer organizations more significantly over longer periods of time through flagship project initiatives, where those organizations and those implementing partners become true partners of the organization. So it's getting to that status where you become a trusted partner, you're able to work transparently over a long period of time, and that power dynamic of we've got the money, you listen to us, sort of starts becoming equalized. And to do that, I think the way in is to really understand the company's strategy, their interest points, their pain points, and how can you support those organizations in your areas, in the areas in which they're interested in, and less about submitting proposals through the front door, which are screened out and very difficult. It's not to say that's not effective, but I think it's more about getting a conversation where you can have a really insightful discussion about what value you can bring to the organization in the field of their interest, in the field of their work, and what you can do to support them. That talks about the direct NPO corporate partner relationship. Obviously, there are ways in where companies still go out on tender, where they say this is a field of interest, can you apply? And then I think there's obviously some skill in terms of standing out, in terms of being able to provide a good solution for the organization. But companies, the reality is they do get inundated with requests for funding, and demand way outstrips supply in terms of the amount of money that's available. So it's about trying to get those relationships going and then building on them and holding them. I don't know if that helps at all.
Thanks, Nick. And I think, as you mentioned, it's an ongoing process. Patricia, from your perspective, what are there any differences or anything you'd add based on the Brazilian perspective, add to what Nick has said?
I think it's quite similar here. What we see is a great willingness from the corporate giving to support third-party projects instead of their own projects. So we're discussing our network, how we can collaborate also to establish some common standards, because I understand that the civil society is overloaded of responding and answering for several different kinds of compliance. That's a characteristic in the corporate philanthropy. So I believe that we can also look to that and try to shape better our kind. What we see here in Brazil also, it's a growing trend of intermediary organizations that they are more structured to respond to this kind of compliance requirements. So they help grassroots organizations uh, uh, making the intermediation of the financing. Maybe we have this also kind of practice.
Yeah. Ati, from your perspective, and I know there was a comment, and I've seen it as well in the research and readings I've gone through around India over the last couple of years, is that there has been a lot of innovation, whether it be in modeling, relationships, and the like. From your perspective, what would your take be on the relationship between funders and NPOs and implementing partners and fundraising?
Yeah. No, I think it's an interesting inflection point because when the CSR Act started, the entire ecosystem was shifting from having global aid and those kind of setups to the way CSR projects are getting structured. So it was a very interesting period. It took about 5-6 years to develop that trust between CSR and NGOs. And I think a few things have worked to develop that trust and relationships, because once a CSR onboards you as a partner, you are there for a few years, right? Because it's so costly for them to find new partners every year. So they really want to grow with you. So I think that's just getting into into their trusted network is really the piece. And one is it has given rise to a very interesting set of events that happen every year where nonprofits and funders are able to come on the same table, bound by content. So a few high quality content forums have emerged, and they are bringing together funders and nonprofits, but these are the larger ones. The matchmaking kind of platforms have not worked in India. So it's really the personal connect of nonprofits meeting funders and has worked. And second is nonprofits also have started doing a lot more thought leadership, which is what I would say is an interesting way to talk about your model, what you're seeing, your learnings, and that attracts corporates. And one thing we've been doing at Satva is encouraging CSR to put out RFPs for what they're looking for, because then they're able to widen their discovery beyond the ones that they are familiar with. And once they are able to widen the discovery, you can always come in, right? With innovation, I think it's been the CSR looking for that academic institution or that innovation organization based on reputation and credibility and so on. So their standards and some of the incubators have actually helped the corporates discover these social enterprises or other innovation models that they would love to fund.
Nick, we've heard Arti obviously speak about the mandated CSR and giving, and it's been 10 years of that legislation in India. What, if any, legislation drives CSI in South Africa? We've obviously got triple BE governance. We've got various different codes. What drives it in South Africa, if any?
Yeah, I mean, the BE codes are still very relevant. The SED scorecard, large companies want to get full points for that. It's obviously a voluntary initiative, but the reality is companies really need to boost their scores, and they can't ignore SED. So it really is quite mandatory, and that drives it. Interestingly, before the codes came in, pretty much like I think the situation in India, there was spending on social programs way before companies were compelled to. And when we tracked it back then, the spend actually just increased with the codes, not because we think companies were necessarily spending more, but because they counted better. So I think that yes, they're a reality. It's important for organizations. What the codes don't do is they don't, they ask you to spend a certain amount. They don't tell you how to spend it. And how impactful the funding should be. So as long as there's line of sight to beneficiaries and the right profile, one gets the points. So I think there's a lot of thinking outside of the regulatory compliance mindset. Obviously, in the mining sector, resource sectors, and others, there are regulatory sector codes. So you'll find in the ICT space, for example, companies are compelled to provide certain connectivity to schools, etc. And the challenge for them is what do they do from a regulatory point of view? Then how do they build on that in terms of innovation and actually going beyond just connectivity, which in itself is not necessarily as effective as it could be. And likewise, in mining communities where you've got social and labor plans, you compelled to, for example, spend money on infrastructure, but if you support the building of a clinic or a facility, and not look after how that facility is managed and the good it does for the community, often there's a risk that it becomes a white elephant or it doesn't achieve its objective. So the regulation goes so far, it is influential in terms of getting people into a space, but it's going beyond and above that the companies are aware of that they need to do, and often that's in their thought processes as well.
Patricia, I mean, we obviously saw that sharp increase in Brazil in terms of spending last year. Are you seeing a similar sort of trend where, it's companies going above and beyond, just meeting codes, and seeing it, beyond that? And what is the regulatory framework in Brazil?
We have a quite robust regulation framework at sustainability issues, not in corporate giving. We have the tax incentives, so we have the possibility to direct part of our tributes. Companies have this possibility, and also us like citizens. But there's a lot of money that's not direct or used because people are not aware about that, or they think that it's more work to do. So actually, I believe more in here in Brazil in market drivers to enhance the investments than necessarily a regulatory framework directed to see corporate giving. We are overloaded. The companies are and people are overloaded with tributes. We are being through a discussion to an implementation that's going to start regarding uh, fiscal reform that we have to go through here in Brazil. So I don't believe that's the best moment to discuss as a mandatory regulated. Um, I believe that we have a lot of space to discuss the quality of the initiatives. Because we have also in Brazil mandatory investments when an industry, for instance, start established in a territory. They have to pay and to invest a lot in infrastructure of the territory to have the license to operate there. And even this kind of investment, we can improve the quality of the intentionality to the impact in their community. Maybe they are only investing some industry could only be investing just to have the license, but we have a potential to discuss much more the quality of this investment, or what's the intentionality beyond the business to promote community and social impact. You're on mute.
I'm on. Never ends. Arti, you mentioned it's now 10 years of the legislation in India. In terms of what you've seen, I mean, what have been the areas are like, I suppose, the positives, and where are there still areas where there could be better implementation of it, or companies aligning their giving efforts a lot better?
Yeah. No, I think that when it started off, it really was like a policy experiment, right? Like, so where you had the reporting and you had the mandate, but there was no focus on quality. I think that took a few years because corporates were first figuring out where they can spend and who they can spend with, and the reputational risks of something going wrong in if in social impact, and also their visibility, because they were asked these questions from their board stakeholders. So I do think that it took a few years to put down quality, But given that the capital, this was a steady capital that was growing year on year, this was not a problem that they could, solve on the side. They had to pay mainstream attention. So that brought a lot more deep diving from the CSR leaders, supported by the CSR committee, which had to have some board members. So it gave that seriousness, right? Like the business leaders would have to be involved with CSR, and they had to meet every quarter to satisfy the provisions of the law. So this led to the professionals who are leading the CSR to deep dive into what kind of partnerships are working, where are these intermediaries, how do we, make more impactful program designs with them, how do we do something flagship, and what does that involve, where we can bring multiple partners and so on. In the second phase, I think there was also a little bit more of an appetite to say, can I fund multiple years? Otherwise, it was the strict 12 months and outcomes being received in 12 months. And so then that led to more, a little bit more freedom to do innovation. Like we have an automobile MNC, for example, that actually funds an incubator for startups in sustainable mobility. So then what happens is maybe 3-4 of them become suppliers later on, but it also has strengthened the ecosystem of innovators in sustainable mobility. Now, this required them to deploy patient capital over 3-4 years. So that is a different type of programming from the yearly programming that happened, right? Like so the focus on innovation and a little bit more of freedom led corporates to think through newer ideas. Recently, we are also seeing more blended finance, because corporates are saying, how can, if I do a plow in this capital, especially in livelihood and to an extent even in education and climate, how can it unlock more private capital? Or how can I underwrite the risk up to a certain point of time and then let the market forces and the business models sort of take over? Because those are some of the models we need. And then you have to structure the program very differently, right? Like, so now it's forcing corporates who are looking at blended finance, and many of them are from the banking and the wealth management corporations, to figure out how do we look at the uncertainty of outcomes, and how do we prep the organizations to look at an outcome focus while delivering CSR programs. And how do we then take an ecosystem approach? Because some financier has to come in with the credit guarantee that you might be deploying through private philanthropy. So how does that happen? I think that what can be better is really, to go further from a problem and need perspective. While it's already started to happen, we really need to go further to the more vulnerable regions, right? Like, for example, Maharashtra and Mumbai, and a city in Maharashtra, which is a state in, which is a city in the state of Maharashtra, Pune. Pune gets 4 times more CSR capital than the entire 7 states that are located in the northeastern region of the country. Right. So, and they are very geographically, they probably can be compared to some of the central regions of Africa, very hilly, where it's hard to reach and not many nonprofits, etc. So what can be better is really more rebalancing of the capital to the areas of need. And 2 is also more patient capital. Some of them are doing it, but not all of them are doing it. And 3 is, we see more business aligned CSR happening in certain spaces, like pharma companies investing more in health, BFSI investing more in financial inclusion and livelihoods. But we feel like that can happen a lot more. So that's something that might look at more improvement in the coming years. Yeah.
And I think your point around, certain areas geographically being left out, and we know why it happens. Organizations may be based in one place. It's easier to work in that area. It's easier if they're NPOs that are on the grounds in those areas. So we get the question a lot in our webinars around how do we get access to those rural areas that are often forgotten. And often needed the most, and that. I want to turn now to the geopolitical, because a year ago when we had this, we had just had some announcements from the American president, which cascaded and set off a whole range of events throughout the year. One of them directly, obviously, impacting NPOs, NGOs in many developing countries, was obviously around aid being cut. But it wasn't only the US that cut aid funding. We saw other Western nations as well. On the economic side, it was a tough economic year, and I think we can see that in some of the research coming through. Maybe not so much in Brazil, but in much of the other territories, you see corporate giving being constrained to an extent. Nick, in terms of the geopolitics, if we look back at 1 year, what was the impact of some of that aid funding being cut? What is some of the impact that we see coming through, and how it's affecting NPOs in South Africa going forward?
Yeah, I think the impact was significant. I think you got to just bear in mind that corporates are one player in the space, and the government and other funding sources as well. ODA funding was obviously a key source, and when that gets cut, it does have massive consequences. In terms of companies, and based on our research, it didn't have as wide an impact as one might have anticipated. So there were about 10% of companies with partners who were impacted or who were dependent on or received funding from the likes of USAID, and of those, not all of them, about half of them, those organizations were negatively affected. I think in the NPO space, out of our research, the numbers were higher. About 15% of NPOs that we surveyed were impacted. More than half lost income, many discontinued programs, or had to undergo staff retrenchments, and some had to discontinue altogether. So the impact they're much greater. And I think that the impact on the corporate funding space, you mentioned earlier an uptick in funding on healthcare, and that might have been part of it. We saw about a 2% increase in healthcare funding, and about 10% more companies funding healthcare, and I think that might have been in response to some of those shortfalls. But the reality is, companies commit to their strategies and their funding in advance. So it's a question of, do they forego some of their existing programs, and then pick up an urgent need based on that, or do they stay their course? And it's a difficult decision to take, and not necessarily a right or wrong decision. But if you head down on doing a certain program, and something helps and something shifts, the decision is, do you continue doing what you're doing and try and do it as well as possible, or do you move into a different space? But yes, look, I mean, it has impacted the space more broadly. It's obviously impacted beyond just the CSR sector, research programs, academic programs, and the like. And some of that, the corporates, not touching through the CSR programs, there might be other sort of points of connection there.
Patricia, from a Brazilian perspective, I know you bucked the trend somewhat in terms of the amount of cash flow that was invested. But in terms of what you've seen, I mean, that indicator may suggest that Brazil wasn't affected that much, or NPOs and the like weren't affected that much because of the windfall from business. But what was the impact of those aid cuts, and what is, because I mean, it's still, we forget it's about a year ago, in some places less than a year.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that we were not impacted. I believe that, we all was also impacted. We had discussed this last year at our webinar. But companies are trying to collaborate more, not only with civil society, but also with governments and public policy. So taking we are trying to help our partners to take them more, to qualify the debate in the integration between corporate philanthropy, public policies that could generate impact, in fact, and business. So when artists mentioned the blended finance, I believe that the asset from the company is to put what they have better, that's their business and their expertise, in favor of social transformation, and thinking about systemic and integrated solutions. So the corporate giving seen as a part of this whole, as a part of this kinds of influence that corporate companies could deliver, it's much more important to look that isolated. So I believe a lot in this, because we have a lot of pressure in the social agenda this year. We are not so that optimistic because we have outstanding performance in 2024, but without the data of 2025, uh, maybe I can suggest that's not going to be that consolidated, the level of investment. It's early to say, but I believe that we have a lot of challenges uh, in front of us, and we have a good moment, but we still have to discuss how to face all this multi crisis that we are living. Because companies, what we hear from our partners, it's maybe that this year it's going to be a moment to wait and see what's going to happen, not only for the social investments, but of course of the business at all. What's going to happen in geopolitical and geoeconomic globally? So they are in this moment right now.
I think you touch on something that I want to also get into, is in terms of that resilience, because the shocks are happening from, whether it be a geopolitical level, whether it be economic, whether it be environmental as well. I mean, we've come through in South Africa. There were instances of flooding recently. I know you've had serious floods in Brazil over the last year as well. So that resilience that builds in. But Ati, I want to come to you just, as we wrap up the geopolitics view looking back, but also looking forward and what we expect this year. What has been the experience in India?
Yeah, I think the resilience in India has been better at the core, because our estimate is that 75% of the private contribution to development has come from domestic sources in India, right? Like, so it's come from CSR and it's come from family philanthropy, that's domestic, as opposed to the global sources. So you have a 300 million US aid perhaps, but you have a 3 billion CSR annually, right? Like, and the CSR is yes, it does rise and fall by profits, but it is a steady form of capital, and there are at least 16,000 companies that come under the purview of the law. So that way, the resilience has been much better. And in many cases, the nonprofits that were relying a lot on global funding and had models suited for that have been looking a lot more at their organizational resilience and building it by getting more domestic funding partners. And even the global private foundations that are funding in India are really now moved on to funding more infrastructure, like the digital public infrastructure, or even hard infrastructure or soft social capital, like the collectives and the groups and that kind of work, or ecosystem building catalytic work. Whereas they are partnering or they are passing on to the domestic funders the more programmatic areas of work, right? Like, so therefore we are seeing a lot more of the resilience being built in this way, and therefore the geopolitical forces not leading to so much of a difference in the way nonprofits are able to operate year on year. But at the same time, I would say that going forward, there needs to be a lot more of the I mean, while we might be financially resilient, a lot of the areas that we are looking at, similar to South Africa and Brazil, are also from a climate perspective, from economic development that is premised on the number of jobs that have to be created, right? And I mean, India is now aggressively moving towards becoming the third largest economy, and therefore for that, jobs and livelihoods are really important. And we still see a lot more of work to be done in poverty alleviation there. And so that's where we see the geopolitical pieces also happening and affecting, because if there is something that happens in the global environment, jobs and entrepreneurship get affected in the country. And it's also a country of small businesses and many small businesses. So I would say those are some of the thoughts.
Tembi, I want to come to your question here. Nick, now we take a look within the organization. And Tembi's question is, how is the stage of growth of the business's CSI unit? So whether it's a department, unit, division, or foundation, how does that stage of growth of the CSI unit influence their investment and shifts from legacy to more innovative financing?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we often get asked, how many people should we employ? What's the right number? And it's not just budget dependent. It depends very much on the approach and how much of that work is done internally versus outsourced. So, if you're simply screening applications and writing checks, you need an administrative team. You don't need a strong internal team. If you're owning and driving the project yourselves as a company, which some companies do, clearly you need to invest in the developmental expertise. And we're seeing all of these different models play out. What we do suggest is that for companies, there's such a golden opportunity to really innovate in this space, and particularly in spaces that are aligned to your business, where you have a deep understanding of the nature of the sector that you're in which case, sort of outsourcing the intellectual side of those projects completely to third parties, I think is a missed opportunity. So having skills either with the NPO who's working with you, but some internal know-how that you're generating within the company and investing in those resources. So the more you, I think, aspiring to systemic change, developing IP, innovating, testing solutions, the more I think you need to bring those sorts of resources on hand. And just another point on that, we also look at how these programs integrate with businesses, and we've got a measure that tracks that. And if it makes sense to tap into the business expertise so that CSI can reinforce what the business is doing. So it's not just about aligning to what the business does, but actually working with the business in terms of actually developing a solution, supporting the business in that process. But in doing so, you're able to tap into business resources. So, you've got HR departments, legal departments for risk, you've got marketing communications people, and you can tap into those resources quite effectively as a CSI program. So choice whether to actually set that up and employ your own staff there, or actually draw on the business in some sort of way in order to leverage the skill set in the business is again something that one can do. You're on mute.
Just a quick one. While I still got you, is it a case of chicken and egg, chicken or the egg? Which one comes first? Is it the department organically growing to the stage where they can do these bigger and better things, or is it a case of saying, well, this is how big our vision is, and we now need to essentially fund it, whether it's more people or whatever the case may be, to to ensure that the organizational design of the unit matches the vision?
Yeah, I think it's about cutting the cloth to suit. You work with a budget, you know what it is, you design your strategy and your approach, and then you resource it accordingly. So a very small program, where you're spending a little bit of money, it doesn't make sense to employ a whole lot of people, because you're going to be spending more on administering the program than you are going to be on development. So, and obviously the opposite way around as well. So understanding what you've got to work with. I mean, some of these companies are spending enormous sums of money, and if you underinvest, it's also in resources. Then you run the risk of actually not being effective in that spend as well. So really designing the program, saying this is what we're going to achieve, this is how much is in-house, and this is how much we're spending, this is the number of programs you're running. Who do we need to run it effectively? Where can we draw on resources from the business to make that more effective? That's the sort of angle, and then formalizing that and bedding that down. I think that's what we would advocate.
Patricia, I want to come to you. We obviously speak about collaboration. It's We all know why it's important. It's spoken about a lot, especially in the development space, because yes, there is a lot of work that's being done, but it's kind of doubling up, or it's disparate, or it's not connected, or we could be achieving more at scale, right? When it comes to collaboration, you've got CSI funding, you've got philanthropic funding, you've got government. What sort of trends are you seeing, or would you like to see unfold when it comes to collaborative financing, or collaboration in the financing space? You've got government, you've got philanthropies, you've got corporate giving. Each you have their own sort of makeup and factors and weaknesses and strong points as well. But how can they work together better?
A lot of possibilities and ways to make it better. Actually, if we discuss in a more broad, not only corporates, because you talk about the rural areas, for instance, and the empty economic provided by companies when we have these empty spaces. We can discuss, for instance, more with independent philanthropy and family philanthropy, how to support that spaces that corporates not achieving. This is an example, but also with governments, because we are talking here about innovation. And philanthropy is a catalyst investment to amplify the innovation in the public policy. We have been doing a lot here at Comunitas in Brazil to support public policies, to test the innovation that public administration can do, take out their risk because they can assume that, and then after testing and showing that it works, we implement, and it had their counterparty to put as a public policy and generate more impact. So I believe that there's no missing money. We miss integration and governance to understand that the problems need everyone in the table to solve it. We need to discuss more the collaboration, not only with companies from your supply chain, or companies that you collaborate in the market, but also with civil society that should be strengthened, and governments. I do believe that we are in this way here in Brazil. We have much more to do and to discuss. We have artificial intelligence uh, bringing more aspects for this discussion, because we are looking, for instance, if we talk about governance, when it comes to technology, there is the algorithmic governance that should be so a matter that we should look, because if you put the technology to make the governance of it all, where what it's feeding the technology, what are the algorithmic that are involved. So I believe that collaboration is the answer for our problems. We have the 17th metric from the SDG goals, but at least it's the less discussed, as by my opinion, my perspective, and we should enhance and foster more and more collaboration towards the sectors, through the sectors, all the sectors, not only the companies.
Yeah, no, and I think that's so important. Otherwise, we just work in silos. Ati, in terms of innovating around finance and models, and crowding in finance, what do you see happening more of this year in India?
Yeah, it's nascent, but there are a few patterns that are emerging, right? Like, for example, we saw wealth management companies, CSI investment, unlock a revolving grant system towards, women entrepreneurs to help them to grow their business. And so then the capital would rotate back, and with that kind of a structure, there was about like a 2x rotation in a period of 12 months. So you landed up giving this as a grant, but reaching twice the number of beneficiaries, and it'll still keep going on, right? Like even after the period of giving your grant, that capital will keep rotating. The second model that we see is where CSR is able to bring in a certain underwriting, like whether interest subvention or like a guarantee for, or a first loss guarantee kind of a structure, where then an NBFC, like a banking institution, is able to give a microfinance loan because you are or a regular loan because you are underwriting the risk of them doing so, right? So we saw this in the case of farmer producer organizations, where a collective of farmers was able to get loans to maybe adopt more climate sustainable practices, or to be able to do some sort of an infrastructure upgrade so that they can process their produce, etc. And to also offer some technical assistance, the philanthropy, the CSI brought in other partners that could help these farmers, whereas the banking organization steadily started to give loans. That's another kind of an arrangement that we see going. A third thing that we saw happening interestingly was where a philanthropy gave a revolving kind of a grant, but not directly to the entrepreneurs, but to another social investing platform like a Kiva, where then Kiva, kind of a platform in India, was able to also bring retail social investors. So the leverage for their capital became almost 1:6, right? Plus the capital was able to rotate. So these are some of the emerging structures we are seeing in innovative finance kind of models. And the farming can happen even in other spaces, textile circularity or other climate innovations, or entrepreneurs in various different sectors and so on.
Before I hand over for the closing comments, we've got about 10 minutes to go. I mean, it could be a topic in and of itself. You know, the world is moving so quickly. AI, how it's being rolled out, what it's being rolled out for is ever changing. How do we see it playing out in the CSI space? Nick, let me start with you. How do we see it playing out in CSI? Is it, will it only just be, asking ChatGPT a couple of questions, or are there more, better use cases for it that we see over the coming years?
I mean, technology is undoubtedly, fast moving, and it's something that corporates are in tune with. So something that they can absolutely tap into, both in delivery of solutions, but also in monitoring, getting ongoing feedback, building data into the way one does things. But I sort of just touch on a point that's been made both by both other panelists, Patricia and Artie, just around innovation. It is such a sweet spot for companies. They can't replace government. The budgets just aren't sufficient to do that. So what role can companies play? And innovating using corporate know-how, IT know-how, data know-how, systems know-how, testing solutions is such a sweet spot. And if companies can use their CSR programs to learn and share, they can influence a much broader space. I mean, government spend in the region of 500 billion or so on education. Our CSI budget is 13 odd, of which half goes into education. So we're talking a small share of that total. But if you take of that 500 billion, how much goes just into salaries? There's 75% of it goes into salaries. Another 20% goes into sort of operational costs and bits and pieces. So if you strip all of that out and you look at what government is doing to really understand how to improve things, it's not a big budget. And corporates, the corporate spend is significant relative to that. And if you bring the sort of, the ability of corporates to think and adapt and move quickly and innovate and test solutions, I think it can be very, very powerful. And yes, AI, absolutely, companies are investing in these processes. They've got resources in the organization that understand this. They will really put the investment in. How difficult is it to say, well, how does that apply to a CSR program? How can we think out the box in terms of how we deliver solutions and monitor and feedback those solutions? So I think more of an opportunity, but we see innovation in our markets. We see companies really are testing. I just don't think we see nearly enough of it.
Yeah, I mean it really is a culture thing more than anything else that drives this, because I mean you're going to fail in some instances, and that's how we learn. Um, Patricia, just quickly, what are we seeing play out in Brazil in terms of use of AI, innovative uses, either from corporates or NPOs?
Some initiatives here of helping NGOs to be trained. A couple of organizations that are looking to that, but it's still not so spread through the smallest organizations and grassroots organizations. They are very far from that. We have in the corporate institutions, we don't have this on our surveys. Maybe something that we can ask them how they are using technology and AI to manage their corporate giving. But my feeling is that they are following the business flow, that they are using more and more technology and AI to point ways to help to make decisions. But we have a lot of I believe that when we talk about this discussion globally, we have a lack here as a development country that we are in disadvantage, and we have to run more and more to achieve the same level of developed countries. So this is a challenge, and it's an obstacle that we should struggle with. Absolutely, because there's a lot of, I agree with Nick, and there's a lot of good solutions that can come from the technology, but we also have to know how to balance that in our routine and how to bring everybody together to bring people that's more vulnerable that don't have this access to the same level of knowledge.
Archie, just finally from you, what are you seeing in India in terms of use of AI and how it's changing, either corporate giving or development work?
Yeah, I think development work, some interesting case studies are emerging. Although a very large share of nonprofits are still figuring out how to use AI, and also in a way that AI doesn't further discriminate or cause inequality, right? So, and I'm biased because a lot of the local language pieces have not even come on to AI in a way. A few things that I'd like to note: a lot of the technology companies are playing a forefront kind of a game in supporting innovations to be developed. Like Google does a lot of work with farmers and climate data and so on, and overall helping very large portion of smallholder farmers in looking at through AI. There is this organization called Karya that's demonstrated some very interesting innovations. They worked, for example, on leveraging the services of rural women in giving voice data in their own local dialect. And these are the long tail of languages. So many million hours of voice data was collected, and each of these women got money for being able to collect this voice data and speak into the AI tool. And so it became a form of livelihood for them also. And then there was voice data collected, which could be used by engines to further translate and better content. So these are some innovations that are coming up in education, especially. I've seen education NGOs that fed their entire curriculum into AI and then used AI to collect nuggets, and based on the learners and so on, it was really able to look at customized type of learning. So in development work, this is coming across quite nicely in different sectors, I do believe. But in the core work that nonprofits are doing, it's still very nascent, and more to be discovered. In fact, there is a huge AI summit that's happening 2 weeks from now in the capital city of Delhi, and it's going to see a lot of these discussions come to the forefront in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, using more ground up data and insight to develop better products and services using AI and further on. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Arti. Let's start with our closing rounds now. Patricia, let me start with you first. I mean, what's your closing comment in terms of, CSI in 2026?
Well, I believe that we have in common here in South Africa, India, and Brazil, it's inequality, right? And thinking about global risks that was already just launched by World Economic Forum and this year report, the social agenda it's coming to the stage, and we know that inequality acts as a catalyst for political polarization, for social instability, and erosion of the trust in institutions. For private giving, for corporate investment, this shows the strategic role that we have to build solutions capable to strengthen local capabilities. Complementing, of course, the fundamental role of public services, but we need to collaborate to reduce vulnerabilities and the vulnerabilities that we have in our countries that fuel this social instability. That for me, it's a key for everything new we have to do this year. Thank you. It was a great pleasure to be here with you, and I'm happy to keep our collaboration.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for your research as well out at the end of the year. Great that we're able to share that. Artie, from your perspective, what are we likely to see for the rest of the year? Big themes emerging for CSI.
Yeah, I think CSI is at a crossroads in India. It's been 10 years, right? So therefore, what do we do this year so that the next 10 years is looking very different? So in that way, can we move from individual projects to system level solutions? Can there be more focus from short-term implementation? Some of the corporates have already taken that route. Short-term implementation to long-term capacity building, patient and innovative capital, and more differentiated ways of doing CSI. And lastly, collaboration and coordination in a way that can lead to systems change, right? Because in each of these ecosystems operates in their own silos in a certain way. So how did this year we see more and more collaborations to look at systems change? So I think these are some of the themes emerging in terms of the sectors. Definitely even though education remains on top, definitely there's a shift from education to environment, livelihood, sustainability. Those are some themes emerging. And again, thanks a ton for this opportunity. Such a pleasure being on this platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Artie, and we look forward to working with you and the Sattva team. Nick, the final word to you in terms of what we can expect in 2026.
I'll be brief because we're on time, but I just reinforce everything that's been said by the other panelists. I would support all of that. I think what we'd like to see and I expect to see are more examples of these innovations, these changes, this out-the-box thinking, case studies emerging of new practice. And we're starting to see that, and we always look for it, and would love to see more of that so we can document them and others can lead or learn from these different examples. It's such a complex developmental world that we operate in. And the CSI and the NGO space offers such potential in terms of solving these issues. So, to see these organizations really be curious about how they can actually be effective, how they can affect change, and to get involved and demonstrate how that works, and then to share it, I think is such a wonderful opportunity, and we hope to see more of that.
Thank you so much, Nick. To my panelists, Patricia, Artie, Nick, thank you very much for your time and your expertise as we discussed, what is clearly a topic a lot of people are interested in and joined us for. Thank you to you, our audience, for joining us, for your questions, for your comments, your chats. As mentioned, I've posted those links to the handbook if you haven't downloaded it as yet, and to the page for the 2026 Business and Society Conference, which we've just opened today. So you're one of the first to get there. It really is always a packed 2-day conference with the masterclasses on Monday as well. All of those details are on there, and keep an eye out for the page, for our newsletters, our communication, as topics and speakers become confirmed on that front. So thank you very much for that. And I'm actually going to leave you with the last word. So we're going to launch the fourth poll, which is actually what what are the greatest opportunity for CSI programs to strengthen and evolve in the next year or two. I'll leave you with that. And if you can, there's a short survey as well, which will help us shape this. But it will really, thank you very much for your contributions, for staying with us today. Take your time to answer those last couple of polls. We really do appreciate your involvement in staying with us today. And thank you very much to the team, Kathy, Manga, Sipe, and everyone for another successful webinar. Keep a lookout for our comms regarding the next webinar on the last Thursday of next month. We'll send those out, topic, speakers, and times as well. And if you'd registered for today, which most of you are, and that's why you're here, we'll send out an article in the full recording next week, and you'll be the first to get that, as well as posting it to our Trialogue Knowledge Hub. So once again, thank you for joining us, and hope to see you in February.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all.